Welcome, friends and enemies, to the Castlecast. A channel where we talk about dungeon synth, dark ambient, and fantasy electronic music. I'm your host, Kevin Hell, and today we're going to try to answer a not-so-simple question. What is dungeon synth? As with any subculture with a passionate fan base, defining the thing we love can sometimes be a touchy subject. So I would like to preface this video by saying that this is by no means a dictionary definition or an all-encompassing history, but rather a brief explanation and an accessible introduction for the uninitiated. Dungeon synth, or DS as it is commonly referred to, is a style of music that straddles the unexpected line between ambient music and black metal. Although its roots can be traced back to Kosmische and Berlin school synthesizer music from the 70s, such as Tangerine Dream, Cluster, and Brian Eno, it wasn't until the early 90s that this darker, more sinister style of ambient music started to take form. In the early 90s, Jim Kirkwood released several tapes that would years later prove to be highly influential to the genre. While this music wouldn't be considered dungeon synth, it is high fantasy electronic music and holds many parallels to what would become dungeon synth and dark ambient. The first Burzum record begins to blend black metal with atmospheric synths, but it wasn't until one-time bassist for legendary Norwegian black metal band Emperor, Havard Ellefsen, also known as Mortis, released a demo in 1992 called The Song of a Long Forgotten Ghost that we get the first use of the term dark dungeon music. And these are also the first steps away from black metal and into something all of its own. In 1994, the first full-length official Mortis album, called Fod Tila Herske, came out. This release was a lo-fi recording of atmospheric, medieval-sounding music created on synthesizers and would set the stage for an entire genre to emerge, including music from other black metal bands like Satyricon and Darkthrone. Dungeon synth still uses the black metal aesthetics, including corpse paint, monstrous appearances, ancient weaponry, and primitive recording techniques. Some staples of the dungeon synth sound, especially in the early years or the old school dungeon synth sound, include long drawn out repetitive melodies, droning soundscapes, medieval sounding scales, and most importantly, a dark atmosphere. Rather than your standard modern songwriting focusing on verses, choruses, and more traditional song structures, dungeon synth aims at creating a feeling deep in your brain where these simple sounds can conjure entire fantasy worlds in your imagination. Sometimes drums and percussion appear, often sampled, but frequently the music is made with only layers of synthesizers. The scene started in the underground tape trading universe, and cassettes are still the preferred format for purists of the genre. Bands like Summoning and Emperor would continue to use epic keyboards and medieval-sounding instrumentation mixed with black metal throughout their careers, and many artists like Secret Stairways, Depressive Silence, and Forgotten Pathways would put out some genre-defining albums in the mid to late 90s that I feel encapsulate the classic dungeon synth sound. Most DS releases are made by solo projects, frequently made in bedrooms and basements rather than recording studios. And that brings us into the 2010s, where thanks to the internet, spreading word of this music on blogs, P2P file sharing programs, and hosting sites like Bandcamp, Dungeon Synth saw a bit of a scene and community being built around this resurgence. Soft synth VSTs and affordable DAWs, or digital audio workstations, gave the ability for just about anyone to start composing their own fantasy music and releasing it into the ether of the internet. Newer acts in the 2010s, such as Old Sorcery, Fife, and Thangordrim, along with many others, started refining and mastering this dungeon synth sound. And small independent labels sprang up focusing solely on dungeon synth and dungeon synth related music, like Gondolin Records, Out of Season, and Dungeons Deep Records. These labels are not only putting out new music, but also reissuing many classic albums that were previously next to impossible to find in a physical format. No longer just an offshoot of black metal, dungeon synth has now began spawning its own subgenres, from 8-bit sounding Castlevania-inspired video game music like Bloodlord, to the soothing ambient sounds of comfy synth like Grandma's Cottage. And trading the medieval sound and atmosphere for something more prehistoric with Dino Synth. The ease of making and releasing your own music is, of course, a double-edged sword. With more and more dungeon synth adjacent projects being uploaded every day, the genre is becoming oversaturated with a lot of redundant and honestly boring releases. But as with anything, the cream always finds a way to rise to the top. So I hope you enjoy this brief introduction of dungeon synth. I'm working on some longer, more in-depth videos to give a better timeline of dungeon synth, so please like, subscribe, and hit the notification button to be updated when I post those. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.